If you hear any crunching in the background, it is not my bones. It is not my bones. Meanwhile, I wouldn't be surprised if it were, but it is in actual fact my pup. He's got a bone. So I don't know if the microphone will pick that up or not, but it's good to see you. Let me see you properly and get some screens out of the way. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Hey, hey. Orchid Ninja Chris Sun is in the house, as is Orchid Ninja Julian S. Sun. Good to see you. Michelle Fucarino. I got your email, Robert. Yes, I have. Anita Brown. Hey. I did get your email. I have to time my time at the desk in increments. My fingers get so cold so fast. It's insane. So I'm way behind on a lot of things, but I can't sit at my desk for very long. Even stuffing the towels in the terrace door, it's not working. If you could see me now, you would have a field trip. Micheline Man, who's that? Look at me, look at me. Anyway, so good to have everybody here. I appreciate that you made it. This is a city bus type style, hop on, hop off. Don't know how long this live is going to be, but one thing I know for sure is that it is scripted, because there's a little side effect. Now, normally I am scatterbrained, but there's another side effect that comes with very, very cold temperatures. My mind locks, right? And on the subject, when it comes to humidity, I sat down and wrote a script. I'm going to try and be as informative. Hey, Nanette, I am so glad you're here as well. Welcome. Jose Perez, hola, buenas noches desde Valladolid. Orchid Ninjas in the house. It's fantastic. It's good to see everybody. Thank you. Really appreciate it. But anyway, yeah, so I'm going to try and keep it as entertaining as possible. And the reason I've also decided to script it, Fernanda, hey, LG, bring in the hearts, keeping all nice and warm and cozy here. Good to see you, LG. Thank you so very much for being here, and thank you for subscribing. I appreciate the support. Right, where was I headed? You see, pew, tangents, squirrels. Right, yes, and another thing is, when it comes to the topic of humidity and orchids, it is easy to be talking about one subject, and then in the next sentence, it sounds like you're contradicting yourself. So, because I'm hoping to get a lot of questions, and if anybody wants to chime in and jump in onto the panel, join the conversation, bring their experience forward, because once again, variables, that word for the hobby, is also extremely relevant when it comes to humidity. And of course, wherever you grow, however you grow, whatever conditions you have, your experience may be completely different to mine. I am going to have to, that's why I put this down into words. If the questions come flying in, I can then go back to my script and get back on track. If I get back on track, because the question is not about me discussing what I want to talk about. It's about me being able to maybe pinpoint what you want to talk about, what you want to have clarified in your circumstances, okay? So this is not like we're going to go all the full distance. If the stream gets too long, we can definitely do a part 2, a part 3, part 4. You know, you get my point. So that is the housekeeping out of the way. I would like to have some beautiful blooms in the background at some point in time, but recent streams have proven the fact that I get so caught up in the topic and the subject, I stopped watching the whole, let's say, backdrop, the B-roll, and it all sort of blends and molds into one. But what I tried to do here was put a few clips together about the conditions, and as it is on a loop, you will see them repeat themselves, meaning that I'm going to be talking about temperature, humidity variables, and how they can affect our orchids, no matter how you grow, okay? Right, the proportion of relative humidity changes with a change in the temperature and altitude of a particular region. If I speak of regions, again, I'm not excluding indoor growing. Consider any of the verbiage and make that work for your environment. So, as the altitude of a place increases, the air gets thin and the moisture holding capacity of the air decreases, which results in reduced humidity. That is what is out there as, let's say, a general adage of humidity and how it works throughout the atmosphere. And at the end of that, I put a big fat or does it? Okay? Now, if whatever I bring up does not make sense, stop me by highlighting my channel name in the comments. That will light up my name and I can see your comment better. Or if you would like to support the Orchids, a super chat will definitely highlight your comment in beautiful bright colors. And I just want you to know that I appreciate you being here. And also, please don't forget to hit the like button up there. It would really help out a lot. We don't have a huge attendance for the live streams, but any like is so appreciated and also supports the stream and the channel. Now, there's one thing I want to check with my script. Yes, Cymbidiums do love the rain, but I always have to watch out by draining my pot because they're not in the ground. Just make sure that I've covered that part of my script. You see, I'm already on free flow. It's a good thing. It's a good thing because that's confidence in the topic, but it's a bad thing because, you know, squirrel tangents. And I don't want to confuse anybody. All right, hope everybody's settled in. Now, let me just start right out of the gate. For 80% of the orchids that we grow in our private collection, a humidity range of 60 to 75% or above is perfect most of the time, all right? So whatever I'm going to be talking about today fills in some details, gives you some more insights, and maybe also confirms what you already know. You just wanted a second opinion. And possibly there's a little nugget of intel where you thought, oh, hey now, that's interesting, never thought of that. I hope that will be the case. So throughout our discussion this morning, consider the difference between where the orchids we try to cultivate grow in nature and the difference between the humidity in equatorial regions as opposed to subtropical, which are also subjected to changes in day length, all right? So while I'm subtropical, Germany isn't subtropical, that's North Europe, but every climate above the equator and below is subjected to changes in the day length. Equatorial regions is also about altitude, all right? Every time we think of the equator, we think, oh, beautiful, perfect climate. No, when we go up in altitude, even at the equator, there is snow. Robbie in the house. Hey, that is so sweet of you. Thank you so much. I hope that you're already cozied, settled in. And if I am going to provide white noise, perfect. All right, so now we're breaking things down in a single formula as best as possible, if that is possible in this orchid growing hobby. Always keep in mind that humidity at sea level has little to no detriment to orchids as opposed to humidity at altitude, because that is where temperatures drop. But we can use the knowledge of these climatic influences to apply the pros and do our best to avoid the cons of humidity in cultivation. In climates with consistent high humidity and regular rainfall, orchids can start to show signs of drowning because they are saturated by the roots being wet, the structures being full of moisture, as well as the stomata taking in moisture when they open. So let me put that into perspective for us as humans, because this may make a lot of sense moving forward in the stream to keep this in the back of your mind. Think of us humans. Can humans survive in 100% humidity? Because in some cases in the stream, we are going to go into 100% humidity territory so that we can understand why orchids in their natural habitat have no issues with that amount of humidity over an extended period of time in their natural habitat. Whereas in cultivation, we will be inviting all sorts of problems. So can humans survive in 100% humidity? And I'm just going to continue on with the answer, but it'd be interesting to know your thoughts about this question in the chat. I have about a 15-second time delay tonight, so I'm not going to try and stick with dead air, but it'd be interesting to see what you think about that. Personally, me as a human being, I would love to be in 100% humidity. The hotter it gets with the higher humidity it gets, I just feel like, oh, I'm coming alive, you know? At least that's how I felt when I was in Kenya. Anyway, so despite those being my preferred climate conditions where I thrive, it is interesting to note that the human body cannot withstand hot and humid climates nearly as well as hot and dry climates. This is going to make sense as we go through the stream, but I wanted to put us into perspective so that we understand when we're talking about orchids and drowning. We're not just talking about the roots. So the reason being that we shouldn't, I would thrive, but science says not so much. The reason being that we wouldn't do so well at 100% is because our sweat cannot dissipate as easily to cool our bodies down. Just like with orchids and their stomata, we have an inbuilt evaporative cooling system, and that is sweat. Without sweating, our bodies have no way of cooling down. The more humidity in the air relative to heat, the harder it is for evaporation to work. So if we cannot sweat because everything is just at 100% capacity, our bodies would overheat. And that is the analogy and the correlation, what I wanted to bring with regards to the attention of the orchids. And when I talk about humidity moving forward and I speak of drowning. Symptoms for our orchids in conditions like these could show themselves as fungal or bacterial rots very, very quickly. No amount of calcium is going to be able to deal with that. Consistent high humidity means that the orchids do not dry as quickly, obviously. Again, going back to the human example, while at that stage we don't have to water because Mother Nature is providing enough moisture in overload, the downside is that we cannot get orchids to dry out. So when I speak of consistent high humidity, I'm referring to 80% for the duration of 3 months, which is probably hard to wrap our heads around if we're thinking, whoa, my grow space, this, that, and the other, all right? But when you look at your grow space, if you're looking at 80% or it's going from 60 to 80%, considering the ideal humidity ratio from till, that's not so long when you say 3 months, okay? But let's talk about what I was just mentioning. If we're growing our orchids outside, and this is the danger with some of the orchids that we have, if they're exposed to these kind of climatic influences, 80% of humidity for the duration of 3 months, including long extended rain, we are going to be inviting issues. There's no two ways about it, with the exception of the orchids that are native to that area because they are adapted and have evolved to be able to live through conditions like that. And as a matter of fact, they need conditions like that. I think of Borneo, Dimorphorus lowii, Borneo. It is one of the steamiest, hottest, high humidity places that I would just out of the top of my head grasp. And it doesn't stop. It is continuous. There's constant dripping and moisture in the air. A Dimorphorus lowii needs that in order to be happy, okay? So if your orchids are the ones that we cultivate because we can get them off the internet, and they are then exposed to a climate that is so hot, steamy, dripping, wet, and you grow them outside, on top of that, it's constantly raining, which can happen, there are going to be problems. Now, this is going to, of course, this live stream is titled Pros and Cons, and, intermixed, you will see that I'm talking about the cons more than the pros, because the pros of humidity is our orchids will do great, but, I'll be differentiating. So there's going to be a swing between the pros and cons. Fernanda Nacimiento says, I have had 100% humidity during last November and December in my temperate climate. However, the temperature was about 18 degrees C, no fog, so very different from tropical conditions. Absolutely. However, you have orchids that can tolerate that and you have them outside, and other orchids that wouldn't tolerate the lower temperature with 100% humidity. I'm sure you brought them inside. That's a guess. Because some orchids, like I said, they can handle it. However, we're talking about 100% and there was no rain. Did you expose some of the orchids that come inside then to rain as well? And did they dry out? Did they dry out once they were inside? You see, all these questions I'm posing now is to get an understanding how it worked for Fernanda, okay? So let me just say, as an example, with all of this humidity that I'm talking about, they came in, okay, and then they dried out. Whereas if we have conditions of 100% humidity over an extended period of time, including rain consistently, we're talking about those on the outside to get a better understanding of what happens if that were to happen on the inside. I understand that grow spaces don't reach 100% humidity. I get that. However, grow spaces can get 60% humidity and rot kicks in. All right, so I like to address the extreme of a situation so that we don't even have to reach that, and we can immediately dial certain things back down to avoid any issues from occurring. All right, and as an example, let me just go back to, so as an example, all right, I'm going to refer to my experience of the rainy seasons in Kenya. And let me pull up something that I grabbed from the internet because I didn't have the warmth to be typing and pecking away at my computer. So I found something that makes sense to me, and I hope it will help you as well. Here is a chart. You can see the altitude is 0 to 45 meters, but above the monthly mean relative humidity over the year in Mombasa, in Kenya, where I grew up, where my orchid journey started. And you can see January through December, we're just a little bit below 80%. We rise a little bit above 80% in November, but that is consistent over the entire year. It's happened. Okay, so I've pulled this up because we're at sea level here. And Kenya being at the equator, I was also saying we're talking about altitude and humidity. So we're going to start at the reference of sea level. Okay, so this is my experience, and I don't want to exclude anybody else. That's why, let me know in the comments if you want a link and you want to intervene with your experience. All right, so now in Kenya, we have 2 rainy seasons. Okay, so while the temperatures do not drop throughout Kenya. Now, when I say cool, it is relative to what is hot. All right, cool is nothing that we experience here in Europe. Cool in Kenya, the cooler season, the cooler rain is only because maybe it's not 35 degrees outside. All right, whoops, you can't see. Sorry about that. You can't see. There we go. Altitude, get me out of the way. All right. Now, the warm rainy season, considered short rains, are daily occurrences for a few weeks in November and December. At 80% humidity, you can see the highest average of humidity in this altitude in Kenya was 82%. And we have short daily rains that brings the humidity up to 100%. Okay. Let me go back to my notes. Which does not rain. Okay, after November and December, there is no rain anymore, but the humidity levels remain steady at an average of 80%. So remember, when we speak of averages, there is a higher value and a lower value, which fluctuate and give us that average. So when we have an 80% humidity, somewhere during the months, the humidity can reach 100. During the rainy season, the short rains, or it can drop down to 60 for whatever reason. But 80% average is a lot of humidity. Now, after a period of no rain, which isn't very long, but consistently high humidity, the long rains come in starting late April through May and early June. So, why do orchids grow so well in such high humidity? Because when I was 12, I started my orchid collection and didn't have a clue about all these values and why orchids grew as if by magic. And all I was doing was tying them to the trees that were in my garden. I was just copying the neighbors, and that's all. So why am I telling you this? It is, first of all, it's fun to reminisce, but it's also hopefully going to help in understanding why we cannot go gung-ho with humidity levels in our private collections without inviting issues that would not happen out in nature. although prolonged rainfall in tropical climates isn't that uncommon, the magic happens because the typical pattern is for rain to fall as a torrential downpour, lasting perhaps half an hour to an hour. And that is when the flip-flops get ripped off your feet because the drains don't hold. But then the sun comes out and dries the wet ground in minutes. Now, drying the wet ground in minutes, while true, the air doesn't dry out because the humidity in actual fact rises even more or stays consistently at 100% while the water evaporates, and orchids and trees are higher up. Hot air rises, and so does the humidity along with it. While it was still pouring, the humidity was 100%, and even if the deluge only lasted an hour tops, the 100% humidity value stays the same for much, much longer until the ground has dried out. But with consistent airflow and the heat, there is no threat to orchids in those conditions. So, here's the recipe for ideal warm to hot growing orchids. If you want to grow your orchids successfully with constant high humidity in a wet dry cycle, then drench them with warm water, as in 25 degrees Celsius water, for 30 minutes to an hour. Crank up the humidity levels to 100% for 3 hours. Drop the humidity levels to 80% and have your temperatures at around 27 degrees Celsius, 80 degrees Fahrenheit, with consistent airflow. That does not have to be blowing a gale, but it just keeps the air moving, maintaining light levels as bright as possible for 12 hours. Now, that is the recipe for warm to hot growers, and it is impossible to replicate in indoor growing. It just doesn't work the same way. And that is why when we talk about humidity levels for indoor growing, if we can reduce them a little bit, the dangers will then also be much, much more minimized. Angel Bus, it's good to see you. Hey, it's good to see you. Yes, exactly. So you see, when we are researching our orchids, now I'm going off on a tangent, but when we are researching our orchids, and we look at them and they're tropical and they're this and they're that, and then we look at the temperature and we can say we can do that in our greenhouse, we can do that in our grow space, and then we look at the humidity, yeah, we can do that, check, put in a humidifier, all is fantastic, and then we give them everything they need, airflow, etc., and the light, and everything is going to go just fine. All right, I'm just giving you the perspective of the total radical side of 100% humidity, no rot, but why doesn't it happen in nature? It's because the air is consistently moving, and mainly down in the coastal regions, the air is full of salt, which also draws moisture out of the orchids when that airflow is around them. I'm not saying that, you know, our orchids need salt, please don't get me wrong, but from the ocean breeze, there is salt in the air. Okay, let me just take a breather here. Robert Forrest, I remember years ago being told the higher the temperature, the higher your humidity should be, but with plenty of air movement. Yes, each morning I kick on the humidifier till my case is fogged up, but increase the fan speed. Yes, and I had your case in mind while I was writing this script, Robert, because you have an enclosed space, like really enclosed, where you can dial all these little details in perfectly. Yeah, unless it's watering or feeding day, of course. Yep. You can also kick in the light depending on orchids that are in the subtropical climates where day lengths make a difference, where they need shorter days, etc., etc. An enclosed space, you can really replicate the ideal conditions, but then you have to also be quite targeted about what orchids you are growing. That's why some greenhouses have a cold section of the greenhouse and the warm to hot growing section that are sort of separated in between, because then they can dial in the conditions as well. However, it is also super important, like I mentioned in a previous live, about fresh air and not circulating old stale air. But anyway, we'll get to that. So that is the climate at sea level in the tropics. And if you can copy that for your grow space for warm to hot growers, you are winning. And you vary lighting according to season as well. Fantastic. You see, If there is a beginner out there that's thinking, I want to grow orchids, then I can tell you that 80%, 90% of the orchids on the market can be grown on the windowsill without too much of a fuss. None of this would really apply. The reason I'm putting it in here is because humidity can be an issue all year round. Of course, it gets a little bit easier when the temperatures warm up. We don't have to freak out so much, but in the winter for us in the northern and southern hemisphere where we do get very cold temperatures, the humidity does rise and then problems start. Now, and not everything can be dealt with airflow, as mentioned in a previous live as well. Airflow actually has an evaporative cooling effect, so you don't want to compound one issue with another with high humidity. Put the fans on and you're cooling your orchids down even further. That is the downside of humidity, whereas, I'm probably going to repeat myself because I'm jumping ahead, but whereas in the summer, high humidity is perfect because it cools the orchid down together with the airflow. All right, now we will probably hear that sentence again because I did write about that earlier in the day. Okay, so, but the conditions I just described relate to what I knew about the tropics. However, circling back to the dangers of high humidity, and if I repeat myself, I do apologize, but I need to stay on track, where the rains persist for hours on end. This is not just my half-hour deluge and everything's great and that on the daily. There are tropical climates where the rains persist for hours on end, day after day, while still having warm temperatures, and that is where issues will arise. The orchids can have a threat of drowning out. Bacteria, fungi, rots kick in, and they have a field trip. Or edema will start appearing on the leaves because the stomata are also taking in moisture, saturating the leaves with no chance of transpiration. So I'm referring to climates, if you are growing your orchids outdoors, that the thing is, these examples are important so that you understand what's going on in your space, okay? Now, everybody that has a grow space, please don't be turned off by what I'm saying, but we need to understand what happens in nature and why it doesn't work the same way for us in our grow space and why we get more issues than any orchid outside. While you have these torrential downpours day after day after day for weeks on end, some orchids will also rot out and have issues. And those are, let's just say, for lack of a better term, the imported orchids. Like I said, the native orchids are living la vida. They love it there. They're accustomed to it. Their evolution has made them hardened off against any kind of issues in those conditions. But anything that, the popular orchids that we like to grow, if you include and put them into your garden, into your climate that is consistently raining, including high humidity, then they're going to struggle. You will actually have to do the reverse and protect them from that amount of rain, because the ambient humidity in the air will also water them. Again, stomata are open. They will take in moisture. Roots are absorbing. Even if you don't water in high humidity, your roots are green. It's awesome. But let's just say the imported orchids, they won't do well exposed to continuous rain for weeks or, days and nights moving into weeks and weeks and weeks. Meanwhile, we save water, but it's not good for the orchids. They can't handle it. Any native will absolutely love it. Robert Forrest says, out here, swamp coolers are highly used during the hot season for greenhouses. I can imagine. I don't know what the humidity ratio is for California. If it's a dry climate, I have no idea. That would be interesting to know how the humidity fluctuates in the summer, because we're always talking about humidity problems when it comes to, let's say, the growing season, when our growths are tender and young, when insects are on the rampage because the temperatures are warming up. Humidity plays a huge part in the growing season. But again, we cannot ignore what happens when the temperature drops. And again, I'm also saying temperature drops for orchids that are warm to hot growers. We have cool growing orchids that are absolutely loving conditions like that, and they wouldn't have an issue, all right? So we really have to kind of differentiate between the orchids I'm talking about and the dangers of humidity. We really have to separate the subject out and look at what we're growing, what our climate is, what our grow space is capable of, to separate out who could be affected and who is absolutely going to love it, okay? Now, when I talk about not being, the stomata are also taking in moisture, saturating the leaves with no chance of transpiration. Oedema is created, and it is a disorder of plants caused by the fact the roots are taking up more water than the leaves can transpire if the stomata are open, and also taking up moisture. This excess water ruptures the cells, particularly on the undersides, and leads to water-soaked patches that can turn corky and unsightly. I do not have an example of that. I am sorry. If I get through this, or if I don't have questions, I'm not going to now pull up Google pictures because I'm going to otherwise go off on another rabbit hole. And I'd like to try, hey, this is live. Yes, it is. Welcome, Orchids by the Lake. Good to see you. So if we get back to the subject, I can then at the end as a wrap pull up some pictures and show that to you. But this is a problem if it gets to this point, and in cultivation, we will see oedema more often than we would out in nature, okay? So the excess water ruptures the cells, particularly on the other undersides, because the roots are absorbing moisture, the humidity is coming in via the stomata, it's just all too much. Okay, the orchids suffering from oedema may show signs of a warty or pimple-like swellings or growths on the leaves, which are a result of water-soaked spots that first appear on the leaves and then develop into a warty or pimple-like swelling. I have heard around the tubes that there are recommendations to remove the leaves that show signs of edema, but I advise against that. Seeing as the damage is not usually affecting the whole leaf, improving the conditions will stop the process, and the leaves can still serve their purpose, even if they will look a little odd moving forward, but they still function. Now, the reason I advise against removing leaves that have suffered from edema is because until the conditions of the excessive moisture and humidity have not been reduced, the younger leaves may start to show symptoms of edema as well because of the reducing of structures that may be able to absorb any excess moisture until such a time that the orchid can metabolize the change in conditions to something more drier or more airflow, even the ventilation of opening the windows. That was a long run-on sentence. I hope it made sense. I'm going to wait a bit. I'm going to go back to our B-roll just because we're looking at a chart. And let's see if I need to qualify any of this. If we want to take anything away from this topic is just to say, do not remove any structures that show edema on them. Let them work as the cushion, the sponge, the buffer, so that any new leaves, new growths do not become affected, because they will become affected, seeing as they are also drawing moisture and their cells are so much more delicate and susceptible to, well, rot. So if you're seeing signs of waterlogged leaves and cannot reduce humidity because of your growing conditions indoors, and you cannot open the window because it is too cold outside, which will perpetuate another problem, it is possible to reduce humidity within 24 hours by placing a dehumidifier in the space to help out. Thank you, Fernanda. Thank you for that feedback. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I know that while I'm writing, I'm trying to think of everybody. I'm trying to make sure that my verbiage doesn't go, above and beyond what I would do in a professional presentation. So thank you for that feedback. Anyway, so dehumidifier, I know, right? Mind blown. We are always talking about humidity for our orchids, and here we come up upon a situation where we need to reduce humidity. Put a dehumidifier into the space, and in 24 hours, your problem will have reduced considerably. It'll take a little bit longer for the orchids to dry out, but you can equal out the higher humidity in your grow space with a simple solution of a dehumidifier until things are balanced out again and you can see you've steadied the situation out, the climate has changed, you can open windows again, okay? There's nothing wrong with going in the opposite direction to make sure that your conditions stay as best as they can for, let's just say, 90% of your collection, if not 100. Now, we were talking about sea level, and that was the easy part. We can go to altitude, even if not that high, but I have an example about altitude and the humidity range for Kenya. Again, I know, who'da thunk? I apologize. I'm trying to think as I speak as to what other altitude areas can I show? Because let me see. Stop thinking, just do it. Just do what you were planning to do. I just don't want to bore anybody. Okay, there we go. Eso, aquí. This is Nairobi. Okay, excuse you. This is Nairobi. You can go and boo. Sorry. I was on mute. Okay, where did I leave off? Nope. That was me. Me and my desk DJ skills, low budget production. Sorry about that. I don't know where I left off. Anyway, I'm just going to see if I repeat myself. I was showing how we were fluctuating here already with the humidity levels in Nairobi at altitude of 1,795. Now that is not very, very high up there, okay? That's not high at all. But you can see the average. This is Nairobi, yes. We are up a little bit higher. So you can see the average in May, the highest as an average, 78%, and in February, 62%. These are values that we aspire to have in our orchid collections and private cultivation. These values are fantastic because, again, to get an average, you always have a little bit higher sometimes, and then you have a little bit lower. But if these are achievable values that we can have as well, and normally they don't pose any issues at all, unless, once again, temperatures drop, okay? Now, at altitude, sorry for my minimal altitude example here, high humidity in combination with cold temperatures can become a huge problem. Yes, I'm still talking about orchid growing outside, but let's just say your grow space has to cool down during the winter months if you're in the northern or southern hemisphere, and you have to bring the temperatures down a little bit, simply, reasons. Then you have to really, really keep in mind that while these humidity averages are perfectly dialed in for orchid growing when the temperatures are acceptable, as opposed to when they get cold, that is danger level right there. Okay, let me block out this screen here because I'm seeing movement and it's distracting my eye. There we go. Yes, it is amazing for orchids. Absolutely. What I haven't added is the temperature variables because I wanted to focus more on the humidity and talk about the temperatures so that I don't, do what I just did, mute myself. Anyway, So when we go into lower temperatures, Nairobi can go down to 41 degrees Celsius at night. Nairobi is pretty much what I'm experiencing on the Costa del Sol, whereas they don't really have winter or fall. But because of the altitude and the fluctuation, things coming in through the Great Rift Valley, the temperatures can get pretty low. While we've never had snow in Nairobi, it can get very uncomfortable. All right, so it's not as safe in climatic wise as it is in Mombasa at sea level over there. So here we are. We're going to trying to replicate what cool growers like, and that is difficult in an enclosed grow space as well. But in short, if you want the recipe for ideal growing conditions for cool growers, then keep your humidity at a steady 80%. I know, sounds high, but while ensuring excellent airflow and super bright light with temperatures anywhere between 1 degree Celsius, that's 33 degrees Fahrenheit, to 15 degrees Celsius, that's 59 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is why I scripted it, because now it sounds like I am contradicting myself. When I just said high humidity is dangerous for low temperatures, and I'm now talking at 80%. But the difference being here, instead of previously saying there was plenty of airflow, adequate airflow in the tropical regions and the lower sea level areas, I am now saying excellent airflows, and you can consider that gale force. And that is when it works. Many of our orchids that are cool, deciduous, hot growers, they come from cloud forests, and we'll get to that. That's 100% humidity, but it is blowing a hoolie up there. And that is why it works. Now, we cannot replicate this, but in short, this would be the recipe. And if you can do that and get the airflow going at 100, not 100 miles per hour, figure of speech, but excellent airflow is paramount. Super bright light, and I'm not talking Cattleya light, but I'm talking like in your face, like bright light. During the winter, with 80%, you can get away with it. Now, I do not advise anybody trying this at home unless you have yourself a little, exactly, not in your living room, absolutely. And it is, some orchids most of the orchids that we grow, let's just say, are adapted to our environment and they can handle the conditions that we provide. And that's a good thing. These are extremes, okay? But I didn't want to leave an open question saying, yes, but what about the cloud forests? Because what I'm talking now is cloud forest material, and yet we have cloud forest orchids in our collections, and they're growing pretty well. They do what they're supposed to do, and they bloom, all right? But this is addressing cloud forest up in the mountains where it gets frigid. The humidity is high because they're in the fog. And then when the sun shines, it's like, the heavens open. They're right up there. The atmosphere is clean and the light just hits them hard, okay? Meanwhile, most of them don't have that many leaves anymore, so it doesn't matter. They don't burn. But for whatever reason, they still need it because the roots are also still photosynthesizing, all right? Now, my notes, moving on. While humidity at sea level helps to keep orchids cool, okay, at altitude, it doesn't have to play that role, seeing as it is cooler at altitude. But the problem arises when the humidity has to be high for a cool growing orchid, while there's not enough light for photosynthesis of the roots and a resting orchid. All right, so that is where we in cultivation have to find the balance. We have to lower the temperatures. They do like high humidity, but it is dangerous in cultivation because we can't be blowing a gale in whatever grow space we have. The orchid needs the high humidity around the roots to be able to draw moisture from it. In cultivation, we cannot have cloud forest-like conditions indoors either, unless we take a different room, here we go, Robbie, and convert it into a haven of bright light, consistent fog, and wind. Not just a fan keeping airflow, I'm talking wind. And that makes noises, that makes things go bang, that kind of wind. It's a very breezy, sometimes gale force kind of wind. I don't know why I added that. Anyway, too much hot chocolate when I was writing. Anyway, and in those habitats, there is no risk of fungal or bacterial rot, which is super frustrating because we're trying to replicate something similar in our climates, and then a new growth starts during the coldest time of year. We have to water, and boom, there's rot because we don't have enough airflow. Okay? And that is the negative consequence for our orchids that need cold temperatures or cooler temperatures while still requiring high humidity in cultivation. All right. So we have to balance out what our conditions permit with how to substitute the lack of one of the ingredients. I'm like, what did you write here, woman? With how to substitute the lack of one of the ingredients by supplementing light, adding more airflow, or even getting a dehumidifier in to reduce the humidity. And we then play the role of the fog and mist the pots or the mounts with orchids that require these conditions. So put your dew cap on. You are the dew. All right. You can't have the high humidity because things are just not going to balance out in low temperatures, but the orchid still needs some moisture, even though in nature, when people say my orchids are resting and in nature they don't get any rainfall for 3 months. And this is true. When you research then that orchid, it won't get rainfall for 3 months, but it is in exceptionally high humid surroundings with the fog, with the fog and everything, absolutely no rainfall, but the amount of moisture those roots are drawing from is insane, and we cannot ignore that. Robbie is saying, I'm getting close with a bright light, a higher than usual household humidity. That is also great. I'm glad that you and your daughter are thriving in those kind of conditions. That's amazing. It's encouraging to read. So yeah, we can play around, we can adjust. We cannot, in my opinion, deny water, no matter if we have high humidity or not. But if we are putting our other orchids in jeopardy, then a dehumidifier will work. But we do have to provide a little bit of water now and then to those that usually do not get any rain or, yeah, let's say rain, precipitation for 3 months. Doesn't mean they go without, okay? Now, I don't want to give the impression that humidity is dangerous all around. It is not, but it is a very important component for growing orchids. The challenge is, though, to understand that if your hygrometer is saying that you have 75% humidity, that you don't think you are safe and nailing the conditions in your grow space. Okay, a massive advantage of having the right amount of humidity is that it regulates the temperature of our orchids by cooling through evaporation. Here we go again with our sweat. I know, ick, but it's important, all right? Evaporating water can release a lot of plant heat, and it is an efficient way of cooling the orchid. Open stomata ensure that a lot of heat can be released. By not having adequate humidity, the orchid will not open the stomata, suffocate, because there's nothing around it to cool it down. The stomata stay closed as a form of preservation so as not to lose moisture through the leaves. High humidity ensures that the stomata stay open, the orchid can breathe without losing any moisture. I hope that makes sense. Let me make sure I don't mute myself again, but let me get our little B-roll going. It's prettier. And here's what I was thinking about. That's why I added this clip. I was thinking airflow. Now, this was a very stormy, breezy day, and my conditions are super dry, so that wasn't helpful. It's completely the opposite of what I was talking about with high humidity. But when you have high humidity, you're out in nature, and people say, yeah, but it works out in nature. That's because it is blowing an absolute hoolie all of the time after torrential rain, and that's why nothing really rots out in nature. Okay? And I just put that clip in because airflow and, well, cloud forest, gale force, and this clip is in actual fact slowed down. The real clip in itself Yeah, it's violent. So I was trying to replicate airflow, not just the violent part, because that is scary. Okay, so we were talking about stomata. Okay, in another live I mentioned that stomata staying open too long because of light levels, etc., is also stressful for the orchids. Tonight we're talking about how it is plays a part with humidity. Just know that all of this, comes together as a puzzle. Okay, so high humidity is also important during low light levels. Here comes another pro. If you are able to keep the stomata open based on the genus, remember our leaves, if it's a thick cuticle orchid, the stomata will open at night. If it is a thin cuticle orchid, the stomata will open during the day. We're not talking about keeping the stomata open 24/7. The orchids have to rest. When they close their stomata, they rest or they preserve their energy. In perfect conditions, the closed stomata means they're resting. In not perfect conditions, it means the closed stomata are preserving energy. Okay? So if you're able to keep the stomata open based on the genus we're talking about, then the orchid will also be able to absorb carbon dioxide, and photosynthesis will also be possible with lower light levels. This is something I'm looking into in more detail because at the moment, with my consideration, with my conditions, last winter, this winter, I am following my humidity levels very closely and watching what it is doing with my orchids because I have low light levels. And there is an element of truth in what I'm seeing happening, because it would make absolutely no sense with what is going on in my growth space that some orchids are able to handle it while others are not. I still cannot differentiate why some and why some not. I have my conclusions, but they are very superficial, can't prove it. It's just my explanation. But high humidity, with the orchid being able to absorb carbon dioxide because the stomata is open because of the high humidity, they will still be able to photosynthesize in lower light levels. That is important for, let's say, climates where things like day lengths are shorter. Let's say species orchids out there, if the day lengths are shorter, that is important. That is why it is easy to understand what we're doing with the humidity and why they can handle shorter day lengths and still thrive. And it is important for us in our growth space if we're trying to cut costs and you're saying, well, my orchids can't take 12 hours of light, that is just not in my budget, I'm going to have to bring it down to 6. If you have your humidity correct, the stomata can still stay open with the light that they have and photosynthesize. A super important balance. So no question at all that keeping the stomata open with optimal light levels will result in maximum photosynthesis, of course. But do not, once again, ignore the dangers of thinking you can increase in humidity in order for that to happen without having adequate airflow. So yeah, hey, if I can get my humidity up to 85%, that means my orchid stomata will open. With my low light levels, they will still photosynthesize. I am inviting in more issues. All right. I can't put airflow in here because I am going to cool the space down. Keep that in mind. All right. Your temperatures are extremely important when it comes to humidity and cold temperatures. All right. Let me just finish this. I see you. And with that, do not underestimate humidity with adequate airflow in lower temperatures. I've just mentioned that because the two combined will decrease temperatures even further. I mentioned that, resulting in the orchid slowing down in growth. Leaves starting to curl because of the colder temperatures. And of course, once again, our fabulous friends, which we do not ever want to have to invite into our growth space, that's fungal and bacterial rots. Okay, I'm getting leaf curling happening. My Dimorphorus lowii is starting to look like a fusilli. That's pasta. That's a curly whirly pasta. Anyway, Angel Bus says, I love the humidity. Yes, I do too. You have no idea how I love it. I have 3 humidifiers running now. Want to add 2 more? Okay. Of course, 4 fans blowing in all different directions, and I open the window in the day. Yes. Oh, yes. I think somewhere in this script, there was that combination as well. Crank up the heat for a bit, open the windows. Absolutely. If it's, of course, possible. That's not possible for everybody, but that is a perfect balance how to overcome, let's say, the colder temperatures. Wow. I'm just trying to get the X-ray vision of your space. With 3 humidifiers, you want to add 2 more, and you have 4 fans. Sounds like a wonderful place. I salivate, Angel. Robbie says, my daughter lives with fibromyalgia. These conditions help her body pain. Grow lights help both of us through the winter. Yes, absolutely. If you're living in a very dark climate, then of course you put grow lights on and they benefit you the same. The spectrum benefits you the same as it would with plants. Too true. Yeah, that's a good thought. Robert Forrest says, I use 3 humidity temperature units in my case that show high and low temps for day and night. Even in the case, there are areas that stay warmer and almost, yes, they create little pockets like my patio. When the sun shines, doesn't mean that all the patio is nice and warm. There are certain pockets in different climates that I suss out in order to take orchids outside as they can handle it. Desiree, hello, it's good to see you. The heaters mess up your plants. That is something that we need to investigate. I don't like your plants being messed up by heaters, but I don't want you to be cold either. I am not using heaters because it's messed up my plants, and well, we discussed that, so I'm not going there. The cold is messing up my plants. Heaters would mess them up even further. Email me, Desiree, if you want to discuss that in greater detail. All right? If there's something that I can help you out with. Julian S., Orchid Ninja Julian S. says, another element to consider is whether the plant is C3 or Julian, please elaborate. What are these hieroglyphics? Or CAM? You're welcome, Desiree. Always, always. The gateway is email. Julian, if you're still in here, you need to expand on that one. And I'm very happy to give you a link so that you can enlighten us with C3 or CAM. Right now, I'm not going to get the Google out. It's just something I would normally do. Angel says, yes, I have grow lights plus 2 windows with, oh my goodness, envy much. And it's I thought so. I thought there was something along those lines. I just didn't want to sound like a dunce when I used vocabulary that was primitive sounding, uneducated sounding, Oh dear, yes. Absolutely, whoa, absolutely true as well. And I say woo because my earbud just came out. Not that I need to hear anything because there's nobody up here. Hint, hint. But yeah. Yes. Heaters mess up orchids depending on what heaters you are using. Usually there are pollutants that heaters exude, and that could be ethylene gas. In the previous live last week, we touched upon that briefly, that even though heaters are clean and whatever, that they do leak and exude gases which are not good for orchids. And of course, super dry air depending on what you're using. And if you've got the fireplace on, wow, oops, there's a lot of other things that have to be dealt with and taken and put into place so that your fireplace can burn without anything in the air as a form of pollutant messing up your orchids. Yes, I hear you. Some orchids are calm, yes. And I would like to know if you, off the top of your head, Julian, have a list that there are, because I did not go down that rabbit hole in doing this not presentation, but this talk. So if you have some examples, if you want to just throw them in the chat, that would be awesome. Let me put that up there and see if Julian would provide us just electric heater beneath my windowsill growers. That's nice. That's nice. Some electric heaters also have residual ethylene coming out of them, even though it is minute, but it can it can happen. It is extremely important. I mean, we're not going to go out shopping or anything. Yes, I thought as much. I agree with you, Julian. I thought as much. I was going down a rabbit hole today of 128 questions, expert questions about orchids, and I thought, oh, save the page, go back to humidity, because I was like, ding! And then there were some of these questions were coming up, and that's why that, your CM, what was that? Your CAM thing, that rang a bell. But because I was starting to read so much and so fast and getting distracted, I was like, I don't know if I saw that correctly or not. Oh, propane tank heater. No. No, Angel, no. No. I had that last year. In 12 hours, one orchid started to show signs of decline. No. I'm sorry to say it that way, but when I see that now, ooh, I've got the neck hair standing up in the back of my head. Had a fan so it wouldn't. Okay, gotcha. Perfect. Ancelia africana is CAM too. Okay. Now we're cooking with gas. Oh, I was gonna, yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Robert, for elaborating on that. We did discuss that in a previous slide. It has to be vented. Absolutely. It'll take out not just your orchids, but other things in your home. And Celia africana is CAM as well. So bear with me, peoples, because like I said, the conditions are not improving here anytime soon. So I'm going to be taking screenshots of this so that I have on my desktop a mental note already, because I want to investigate. Yay, investigate. I prefer to investigate in a duvet, all wrapped up like a burrito. My duvet burrito sessions. You're very, very welcome. That is what we're here for. Thank you for asking these questions. I appreciate that, because without these questions, without this dialogue, the whole concept of being interactive here on these live streams is poof out the window. Okay, so now we're going to check if stomatas are open if you are unsure. Now, this is not something I recommend that you do with every single orchid and you do it once a week. Just as an experiment, if you have an orchid that you're confident is not going to be affected, you can actually check whether the stomata are open or not with alcohol, anything less than 80%. Okay, so let's say isopropyl alcohol, all right? Do not go anywhere near 100% alcohol, all right? But you can let some of the isopropyl alcohol flow onto the underside of the leaf and rub it in. The alcohol will soak into the leaf through the open stomata. As a reaction, the leaf will turn dark green. The darker the green the leaf turns, the more the stomata are open. If there is no difference in color after rubbing it in, the stomata are closed. This way, it is possible to determine what extent the stomata are open for what it's worth. Like I said, don't do this if you're not comfortable with it. This is not something, I'm not saying you have to test the openness of your stomata or not, but in case you were wondering, so how do I know if my stomata are open? Well, the first thing is, my quickest answer to that is the cuticle. Again, thick cuticle orchids, stomata open at night. Thin cuticle orchids, the stomata open during the day. Thin cuticles for me are the likes of the Oncidiums and all the things like that. And if we want to then go to the thick cuticles, as a quick example, would be your Cattleyas and your complex Phalaenopsis hybrids. Angel Bass, orchids by the lake. I thought you were going to do some electric construction here. Your place is super cold. I know, yeah. Brr. Yills. Seems like the deep freeze has come. Anyway, so that's just a little side information how to test whether your stomata are open, but honestly, it's not something I would say, oh, why don't we go and check if our stomata are open, especially during the colder months of the year. Again, alcohol evaporates, evaporative cooling cools down the cell structure, cold cells collapse, and issues. Don't do this in the winter, or If your grow space, for example, is beautifully controlled and you're just living la vida with your orchids in this beautiful greenhouse like Orchids by the Lake, where everything is just fabulous, then go ahead and test with the alcohol just to see, out of interest. All right. Now, speaking of greenhouses, with regard to humidity in the greenhouse, a distinction can be made between relative humidity deficit and microclimate. All right. Greenhouse, grow space, extra room, spare room. In my case, it's a dining room, but it's not enclosed. All right. Microclimates are also important. We can create a certain amount of humidity using microclimate technique. All right. The microclimate, that's by definition, is the humidity between the plants from the substrate to the leaves. All right. Not left, nor right. We're not microclimate left, right of the orchid. Microclimate meaning from bottom to top, that way. Starting from the bottom to the top, that creates a microclimate. With the appropriate leaf coverage, the microclimate of the orchid will be better. As the stomata are mainly found on the underside of the leaf, evaporation can be reduced with a good microclimate. So that helps. When you talk about certain things like pebbles and humidity trays and things like that, in my case, my setup hopefully provides a good microclimate in my extremely dry ambient climate of 30% humidity during the warmer months of the year. Leca self-watering, evaporation through the leca, from bottom to top all the way up. And the stomata on the underside of the leaves, meaning the evaporation helps with the humidity, and hopefully my stomata can take in that moisture. Okay. So a good microclimate can also help out in dry conditions, and it can also help out in cooler temperatures if you're concerned that your humidifier is going to, not full blast, but it's doing a little bit too much of a good thing. You can tune it down, but focus on the microclimate around the pot and the orchid itself, okay? And of course, in a grow space, when the humidity is not that high, this is also extremely helpful. So you might be thinking that I've veered away from the topic of humidity in general, but let me qualify where I'm heading with the evaporation in relation to humidity, okay? Evaporation is the most important way and quickest way for a plant to lose heat. Plants use on average approximately 5% of the light for photosynthesis. In comparison to what we throw at them, they use 5% of that. But 60% of the light that reaches the plant is converted into heat and should be released by the plant, mainly through evaporation. Therefore, water evaporation by a plant is a very efficient way of releasing heat from within the plant. The condition, however, is that the stomata stay open. Otherwise, it will be difficult for the plant to release its heat. In this case, the plant temperature can increase too much, which may result in plant and cell damage, overheating, sunburn. An example of this is chlorophyll damage, sunburn, as a result of which the leaf can turn yellow, sunburn. And if we don't take away the orchid from the sun burning it, then of course we get that dry, crispy spot, and well, most of the leaf then is history, unless we only have a minute spot. Here we have Mr. Ken said he used the propane heater and radiator heater, was going to try that plus construction. Not sure now. Have to work out a lot of details. Take your time. Now's the time. Sounds like you've got good people around you, Angel. Robert Forrest says most gas heaters can be used but must be vented since the off-gassing from combustion is toxic to many plants. Yep, and humans. Oh, my patio with the rain and the orchids outside, I can stand there and cry for joy. Honestly, when I get to have my orchids outside, the temperatures are right and it actually rains. It's just the best feeling ever. And I have it so very rarely. Normally it rains and it is far too cold for the orchids to be outside. So when that happens, it's like I'm the tourist in a new city. I have to go outside and, film it. And people are probably going, oh, here she is, another clip with rain. Boring. I'm like going, look, it's raining. Oh, goodness me. I'm loving the dialogue in the chat. I love this kind of dialogue. Bring it on. You know, I hope that one day maybe we'll have 150, 200 people in here and everybody is throwing their experiences into the chat so that the conversation can get going. And then, of course, people come up on panel. But at least there is now, we're seeing something that I really am aiming for, is the communication amongst yourselves right here while, you know, I'm talking about something, and then questions get answered straight away without 8-10 hour time zone differences, blah, 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 and then comments. I love this. So yeah, this is the prototype of where I want to be headed with the live stream. So thank you for giving me the goosebumps, and they're the warm and fuzzy ones. They're not the cold goosebumps, the fuzzy ones, the good goosebumps. Thank you. All right. So we are talking about evaporation and sunburn. Anyway, so as a massive advantage, I'm going to talk about humidity like it's the devil, but no, it's not. I hope you can see where the differences are from what I'm saying, where it's dangerous, how you can counteract it, and where it is a massive advantage. And here is a massive advantage, which, oh, I'm so happy I even made a video about it when it happened to me. High humidity is being able to safely fertilize at higher levels than in a dry climate. Once again, high humidity acts as an evaporation buffer, allowing the roots to absorb nutrients without having the media dry out too quickly, leaving salts behind, especially when growing orchids bare root. The luxury of being able to throw, maybe 500 parts per million at an orchid at 2 p.m. in the afternoon with humidity of 80%, and the roots just absorb it, and it's just awesome. It's like, you know, give me 3 months of that. I would absolutely love it. And let me tell you, my setup is, you know, there's so many other reasons why I'm doing it, but it's the fact I don't have enough humidity. I would be going nuts in bark. I cannot water quick enough. Sometimes my Anselias and my Catasetinae, even during the grow period, with a reservoir. I'm astounded how quickly that reservoir is empty. So the setup can really, really help. Oh, well, you have safe travels, Desiree. Make sure you're safe, okay? Don't let there be any bullies out there, no road hogs or anything like that. Get your blades out, you know, like, was it in Greased Lightning? When they were doing the, oh gosh, come on, Nina, brain. When they were doing that race and they cheated and they got those razor blades out, you get those out. Make sure that nobody does anything to you, okay? Safe travels, Desiree. Thank you for sticking around and listening. I appreciate it. All right, so yeah, high humidity, super pro, massive advantage with high humidity is that there is hardly any risk of fertilizer burn, no salt buildup on the roots. And even while it's raining, if you are in a climate, as mentioned earlier, where you have consistent rain and your roots are actually wet, and there's no more nutrients coming from wherever you've mounted your orchids on, go and spray them with fertilizer while it's raining. They need something because it's a massive flush cleansing, so to speak, of anything and everything that the orchids are mounted on, even in a garden, if it's just consistently raining with high humidity. So they can be going for a long period of time without any nutrients. And they always say, well, my roots are saturated, I can't take up anymore. But they are growing. In these conditions, they are growing. So throw fertilizer at them. I know it looks silly. I told my neighbor, if you see me watering while it's raining, don't call for help. Everything is under control. But it is absolutely paramount when there's consistent rain in a climate, high humidity, you do not forget to fertilize or even supplement. Throw the calcium at them so that you can avoid rot that way, okay? A clean tree trunk is only going to expel tannins, nothing else. After a week of consistent rain, torrential rain, where, you know, flooding and all that business can occur. Tannins is all you're going to get, and very, very weak particles of that as well. Okay, what did I have for my next bullet point? Measures for an optimal humidity regime. Keeping humidity and grow space favorable throughout the seasons. Oh, that sounds like a good one if you're still interested. Keeping humidity and grow space favorable throughout the seasons. So if you're having a hard time with heating the area where your orchids are growing, then know that cooler air will have higher humidity naturally than warm air. The cooler temperatures can work in your favor as long as your airflow is minimal and does not cool the air down further. Should your cooler temperatures and climate create a humidity level that are not compatible with your orchids, then consider once again placing a dehumidifier in the space to balance things out. It doesn't have to be a permanent feature, but it is certainly very handy dandy if things were to get out of hand. And again, in 24 hours, your situation will have resolved itself, and you may only need to do that maybe once a week, depending. Maybe it's just a sporadic situation where your humidity went too high while, you know, the temperatures were too cool. Okay. If keeping the area where your orchids grow nice and warm is not such a problem, then heating devices may dry the air out too much. So we addressed that earlier with our heating. In that case, of course, use a humidifier to buffer against the dry air. Also, by moistening the media slightly from the bottom of the pot, water from the substrate can evaporate better, which improves the microclimate again from bottom to top into the stomata, letting them breathe and help with the photosynthesis. And because it is winter, even though maybe some of your orchids are resting, remember that they do need water. You don't want them to get too dry. Your resting orchids do need high humidity because of where they come from. Remember the clouds and all that business? So with smaller quantities of water, you can also increase the humidity in those kinds of orchids by keeping the microfiber, the microclimate around the plant consistent. All right? Do not deprive resting orchids of any form of moisture. We are not talking about filling the pot, watering as you would in the grow season. But if you're, let's say you can heat your space and it's getting too dry, they do not like any dryness for an extended period of time. Even though they don't get rain where they come from, they are surrounded by clouds and dripping moisture, okay? All right, Angel and Robert, you two are having a conversation. That's awesome. Okay, just do safe travels as well, Angel. Safe travel, please. Get the James Bond functions and all your switches and everything ready. Be safe, okay? Right. So we've done that. We've done the advantage of high humidity. So now I've come to a point in my script where I added a thought, and to be honest with you, I don't remember the thought. So we're going to find out for the first time together, but this isn't bold. So there was a reason why I wrote it. Let's go. Should be interesting, this one. I just want to add an extra thought consideration when it comes to figuring out the culture of the orchids we have in our collection, or as we research orchids to figure out if we can even provide what they need to make them grow well. Okay, so far that makes sense. Earlier on, I talked about the humidity levels based on the temperatures at sea level and at altitude, although be it on the scale that I can speak of in Mombasa versus Nairobi, etc. But when looking orchids up and seeing where they grow at altitude, trying to calculate what humidity you have would match with the orchid in question, there is a general rule that we cannot always rely on, and that is, oh, I know where we're going with this. Yes, I'm glad I added this. Okay, I'm going to repeat that because it just clicked why I put this in here, because this is something I researched a lot back in the day when I was looking up care guides for the orchids I was going to buy, and they said altitude XYZ bloody blah, and I'm like going, so how much humidity is at that altitude? But they didn't say. So I went down a rabbit hole. Anyway, in summary, this was my rabbit hole and my conclusion. Anyway, so here we go. I'm going to repeat that. When looking orchids up and seeing where they grow at altitude, trying to calculate what humidity you have would match with the orchid in question, there's a general rule that we cannot always rely on. The general rule is relative humidity changes with a change in the temperature and altitude of a particular region. As the altitude of a place increases, the air gets thin and the moisture holding capacity of the air decreases, which results in reduced humidity. Relative humidity decreases linearly along a straight line with an increase in altitude at an average of 4% per kilometer or 0.6 miles. Okay, so if I have 100% humidity at sea level, I go up a kilometer or 0.6 miles, I'm at 96%. I'm at 92%. Sorry, I'm dyslexic. I was going to say 29. I'm at 92%. If I'm up 2 kilometers, that is the calculation. Relative humidity decreases linearly with an increase in altitude. Let me share this page. Let me just share this on the screen, just so that I'm fair, because I don't think I'm stumbling through my words, but I did put this in bold. So there is a reason for that. There's a reason why it's here, okay? Very neat handwriting, isn't it? Okay, can we zoom in a little bit? Boom. As a matter of fact, we can. All right, I'm over here. I'm right here. Down here. Okay, and let's get rid of you there. Let's get rid of, oh, I can't get rid of me because we did that before. That didn't work too well. Okay, so relative humidity decreases linearly with an increase in altitude at an average of 4% per kilometer or 0.6 miles. While this may be the case when discussing climate and forecasting the weather, especially for aircraft and their flight path, it does not necessarily apply to our trying to get the humidity dialed in for our orchids as we research them. If we were to go by that rule of thumb when it comes to orchids, we have to factor in the dew point. Okay? That is another rabbit hole. Did I go there? No, blank page, because I was like thinking, how far do I go? I don't want to confuse anybody. I want to keep it as simple as possible, okay? So if you stumble across this kind of little line here, calculation, if you don't see the humidity in a care sheet of an orchid that you are researching, do not follow this, because we can be at altitude that is much higher than sea level, of course, and we have 80% humidity because we've got clouds, all right? So this is not a part of the information that would apply to our orchids. This is more about aircraft and flight paths, at least, and also weather forecasting, okay? But nothing to do with orchids as we research them, okay? So the dew point will actually determine how much humidity and all that business is then around. But let's talk about clouds. Let's talk 80%. I think that keeps it all very, very streamlined. Just, you know, don't try to factor in these kinds of bits of information. As we go up in altitude, the temperatures drop. We're down here. And when it reaches the dew point, the relative humidity is 100% and clouds are formed. And while we're not high up in the atmosphere, some of our orchids are cloud forest dwellers and the humidity is exponential as mentioned earlier. So there's the blank page. I was going to elaborate on dew point, this, that, and the other, because that is also something that, you know, adds to the humidity. But I don't think that that is going to, let's say, enhance, increase, make the information any better, any more valuable. I think the basics and then understanding and the relation between humidity, temperature, airflow is already, I think, quite well discussed, unless anybody has any questions or any input of their own, and then please, goodness me, bring it on. I can also drop a link if somebody wants to come up and talk about their experience with their ongoings in their space and how they're coping. Sounds to me like there's a lot of plans for spring and moving into greenhouses, and ooh, wonderful. Sweet dreams are made of that. Excuse me while I have a bit of water. So right now, let me go to, no, today, no iced water, in case anybody didn't hear the ice clinking. Whatever is room temperature, it's cold enough. I don't need ice. Let me go to temperature converter. Let's have a look. Today, my grow space was 55 degrees Fahrenheit, 13 degrees Celsius. That's cold. Outdoors, I had 14 degrees Celsius, 57 degrees Celsius. So it was colder inside than it was outside. Still, I didn't move all my orchids outside because I didn't have pockets of warmth because I had a bit of a breeze going. And that's the circumstance up to now for all the way through to Wednesday. Sensor push can show you how the relative humidity is working in your grow space. Strongly sensor push. Very interesting. Sensor push. Okay, that's interesting because I have hygrometers here. Oh yeah, speaking of the temperatures, my humidities were 75%. So it was, you know, we're on the edge, but nothing is really actively growing. Not concerned. I don't have anything looking like it's about to rot except my summer bloomers. They are just, but that's nothing to do with humidity. That's cold. That is the cold. Okay, sensor push. Oh, welcome in committee. Hang on a second. Or maybe not. Nope, just Baloo. Oh, I've got a beautiful, I have to do a video. You'll see Baloo come feature shortly. I won't get away, I won't elaborate on that. Sensor push. Of course, I'm in the German one. Everybody ever familiar with sensor push? Anybody else work with that? Doesn't Tropical Plant Party work with sensor push? I'm not sure. Okay, and can you dial it down? Orchids by the Lake, can you dial it down? When does it, so your sensor, Orchids by the Lake, your sensor tells you when your humidity is too high, it alerts you. What does it do? And then can you dial it down? Is my question. Yeah, okay. So I thought Stephen was using something similar. I didn't know that it can alert you, but you have to then go and do something to interfere with your humidity manually, yeah? It's not like does it activate? Yes. So it'll alert you if your humidity is going too high, but then you have to physically do something about it. It's not like it can then initiate some kind of activity, the heater to go on a little bit higher in order to reduce the humidity, no? You still physically have to intervene, even though the alert tells you it's gone too high. I'm going to wait. I have a lag. Yes, but then you can set up a system according to that. I use my Orchids by the Lake uses the assistant. Okay, that's good. Good stuff. So here's a product recommended, sensor push for too high humidity, and I am assuming that it also works for when the humidity is too low. I guess it works both ways. All right. and then get yourself an assistant. That is if you're in an outdoor space. Me, I look at my little hygrometer in here. I have an outdoor sensor for the space where I want to put my orchids at during the day where the sun shines, and then I can balance out the temperatures, and that's pretty much how I work things. All very primitive in my setup. And it still can show you what you said. That's awesome. That is awesome. Fantastic. Right, if there's no other questions, Robert Forrest says, I have a humidistat that I can set where I want my temps and or humidity, right? All right, that is another kettle of fish. That's awesome. So yours is fully automated once you've put in the information. That's great. I love that. Back in the day when I was working, I'll tell you how far I got with what I did here with my indoor setup when I was working. I would leave before I left the house, not while I was having coffee, breakfast, or getting ready, but when I left the house, I switched the lights on, left the house, and they were switched off when I came home. So one day they may have gotten 14 hours of light, the next day maybe 13 hours of light. And that's why I never set them on a timer to go off at 8 or whatever, because it was like, I don't know when I'm coming home. And I wasn't trusting the electricity in this property. I thought that manual goes best. So some of my orchids during the winter got a lot of light, which was amazing. They did superbly. Meanwhile, they never complained. And then, of course, let's say on the sunny days as we moved into spring and stuff, things were then dialed back a little bit. It was awesome. Some days, just to give them a rest, I wouldn't switch the lights on at all. It was fantastic. Those were the days. And then when my days off, I would schlep them outside just to have fun with them. Okay. So basically, that would be it for this live stream for the moment. Once again, unless you have any questions, if anybody wants to come up, otherwise I'm going to call it and say thank you so very, very much for being here. Like I said, I am all warm and fuzzy now. Even if you make automated system, you never know when things go wrong, and that's when it can alert you when things go wrong. Good stuff. Okay. Do you have a discount code, Orchids by the Lake, maybe? No bells, no whistles. Angel, you know, sometimes it's just, oof, it just gives me peace of mind. Even back in the day, because the person that helped me set up this installation, he said to me, put in a timer, and I'm like, we're in Spain, dude. We're in Spain. You really think a timer is going to work? I bet the product works, but you have to have the infrastructure to make it work properly. I think my little finger up and down will do the trick. I said, just put it all onto 2 switches because I need the blurple and I need the others. So, you know, we can, up and down. I'll do that. Robbie, a deep dive. Maybe a deep dive next time. A deep dive, absolutely. I'll be very happy to do that. Didn't want to go into the rabbit hole of dew, but I have the screenshot about the carbon dioxide absorption. That is super interesting. Like I said, 128 questions of deep dive orchids, that a page I found today, and I was like, stop it, back to humidity. Oh dear. Anyway, thank you everybody so very, very much. Continue with your safe travels. Make sure that you get there. Make sure that your loved ones see you. And I hope to see you maybe domani, mañana, tomorrow in our next live stream. Stay safe out there. I love you. Your support is super appreciated. Take care. Bye.